Hey guys, it's Tunico Mantua. So I took a long break from doing YouTube stuff just because I've been so busy and I'm about to start my next job. So I'm just going to talk about my trip to the capital of animation film festivals. So for those who don't know, Annecy Film Festival is an animation film festival that takes place in Annecy, France. And it's a really big event for animation. And this is where they screen short films, feature films, previews of projects that are work in progress, panels, pitches, amongst other stuff. And it's quite a big event. It's very international too. You're getting a lot of films and projects from all over the world. And the cool thing about Annecy is that the festival takes place throughout the whole town, or the heart of that town. So it's not just one single building or place where everything takes place. There's multiple screenings happening in different parts of that town, different buildings, as well as public open air screenings that just take place outside, which was really cool. On top of that, I got to meet up with some fellow animators that I've only communicated with online, or reunited with some people that I've worked with who were also in that festival for that time. And the whole thing goes for about a week. So I'll just talk about the reason why I'm there, what I think about the festival, what I think about the town, and I will also have to talk about a tragic incident that took place within Annecy that made the experience quite sad and quite surreal and solemn for us. That really changed my perspective in a lot of things. So, first of all, why was I there? And of course, there's multiple reasons. One of the biggest ones is because I finally got my US citizenship, therefore I could travel to Europe, I could travel to different places in the world without having to deal with tourist visa bullshit. Before I had a US American passport, I had a Filipino passport. If I wanted to go to places like Europe, America, or certain parts of the world, I have to go through a tourist visa application. I have to pay a fee. I have documents showing my visa, copies of letters of where I'm staying, certain invitations if I had any, my overall itinerary, in some cases, my overall savings. Some tourist visas actually require travel insurances. When I used to travel to different countries with a Philippine passport, I always carried a binder having all these documents. Now, with an American passport, I didn't really need to do a visa application for Europe. I arrived in France, they just looked at my passport and said, hey, welcome aboard. Whereas back then, I had to provide documents, I would be hounded with questions of where I was staying, I would be brought into a separate room to get frisked. So going to France, and specifically Annecy, was way more accessible to me now. Second was I was finally going to meet up with the European teammates that I had in the production that I was on. Unfortunately, that got shelved, but it was still on the table that we were going to meet. And third, well, at first my work permitted me, but because that production got canceled, I had a lot of free time on my hands. I was in between work, so I was able to travel. So this trip was my second time ever in Europe. It's my first time ever in France, and it was my first time traveling with a US passport. And, traveling with a US passport, that was the first time I experienced that travel privilege that normal Americans have underestimated for a long time. So next, I do want to talk about my thoughts on the film festival. Now, truth to be told, I didn't really go there to watch cartoons or films, just because I will catch those on later in the future. This is my first time in Annecy, France. Why not just do more touristy stuff? If there are screenings that I can attend to, I will try. Now, the way Annecy Film Festival works is that you can reserve your screenings so you don't have to wait terribly long in line just so that you can have a seat. You can reserve those online, but once those are activated, a lot of that online reservation has been taken. Another thing with the Annecy Film Festival is that there's multiple screenings happening at the same time, and some will go on repeat, some are just like a one-time thing. There's so many different options where it's kind of hard to choose what you want to check out, especially when you don't know what the films are all about, unless it's for a popular project or a well-known studio like Disney. I only went to two screenings. One was just this open air screening that took place by the lake near the park. It was kind of like a picnic setup where there was a giant screen and then there were like speakers all around that park. And that part was really cool because when sound effects played, ambience, you could hear it behind you, beside you, all in this open space. The second screening that I went to that me and my friends fell in line for was the What the Fuck screening, or the What the F screening. That one was cool. As soon as we stepped into that auditorium, it was like a party. People were dancing, laughing, screaming, throwing paper planes all over the place. Music was playing. And of course, it played some of the most funniest, weirdest, and sometimes heartwarming films. And of course, the audience reaction is kind of like the same feeling you'll get from a 48-hour film festival where some people are drunk, everyone's just like screaming and laughing. So to me, that was a good time, and those were the only screenings I went to. I think if I were to go to Annecy next time, I will try to take advantage of the online reservations, find a few films that I do want to watch, and experience more of that. But sadly, by the time I got my Annecy ticket, I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to check out, what I wanted to see, or what to expect from the festival. So next time, I'll know. Also for this year, and I'm pretty sure it's pretty much every year in Annecy, there's just a lot of students. There is a good mix of professionals, executives, producers, but I just remember there were students everywhere. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's pretty much similar for events like CTN, Lightbox, etc. With that being said, I still enjoyed being there without having to experience all the film festival stuff. I was exploring the area, I was eating good food, I was checking out some of the gardens, the chateaus, the streets. Me and my buddy, we actually caught Ricky Gervais walking up the stairs towards the chateau. The chateau itself was super cool because it also acted as the museum for the town, where you can see the history of what that town was like. You can look at old maps of what parts used to be certain parts. Like there's a part of the town that used to be a prison, and then it became an old people's house, and then it just became this open space. It's a very walkable area, and I was like walking for about 6 to 8 miles a day. Again, eating good food, meeting up with some cool people, meeting up with friends, and being able to meet people that watched my videos, watched my YouTube, or knew about me. And it was so cool of them to come up to me and talk to me about stuff. A lot of the people there were so passionate. Not only did I check out some of the touristy stuff, I got to go on the lake on a boat, swim a bit, swim to like a small little cliff and just jump off it. It was a really chill time. And then during evenings, there will be get-togethers, bars, people are drinking, people are socializing. I will say that it's a bit way too packed for my taste, but it was just nice being in a very completely different area. So I will say that you can go to Annecy without having to experience like the film festival stuff or catching screenings. You can just go to the place, eat good food, walk around, meet up with some friends, go to different get-togethers or parties. It's all very cool. So if you just want to go to the French Alps by the lake, eat good food, check out some cool attractions or tourist spots, walk around a really beautiful town, meet up with some friends and get drinks, you can still enjoy the place without the festival. So something that I will say is make sure your phone is charged with a Google Translator and bring euros and cash. I would say about 300 euros, because when we landed, we had to make an emergency trip to the Annecy hospital because one of our friends was having a pretty bad inflammation on his foot. I'm not going to get into the details of that condition, but the airplane flight made it way worse. So we had to go through that. The Annecy hospital is weird because they make you go through all these weird hurdles that is kind of counterproductive. Most of them do not speak English, so I think the Google Translate app that I had on my phone kind of helped me describe the issue or the emergency. And again, make sure you have euros and cash. I will say that this year was terribly hot. There was a very brutal heat wave, and I think that also contributed to some casualties that happened within the town due to the heat strokes or due to the sudden temperature from, let's say, being in the hot air and then jumping in the really cold water. And when that happens, your body goes to shock and some people will have trouble swimming. So while this stuff was happening, you could still rent boats. No one was talking about the accidents or the casualties that happened. They didn't even warn us about what not to do, which led to some of these tragic accidents, and that part was kind of alienating to me. And then I'm going to have to talk about something that is quite hard for me to talk about. So Luis de la Rosa was a very talented animator that I had the pleasure of meeting in Annecy. Now, I will say that I've never worked with Luis, and I will say I wasn't close to Luis. Going to Annecy was my first time meeting him in person. We've known each other for a bit through online, but we didn't really talk to each other. So when I went to Annecy, I met up with a few friends of mine, and then we ended up in some cafe where Luis joined us, and that was my first time meeting Luis. And I feel like that was one of the best days because as a group, we all hung out together for the whole day. We had some good food. We went to restaurants that had really good service, and then we were laughing about a restaurant that we went to earlier that day that had terrible service that treated us like shit. And then towards the end of that day, we all walked up the stairs towards the chateau. We just walked around the area, talked stuff. We ate some good food. And then, we're just like sharing our future projects and our dreams, Luis had this amazing animated project that he pitched over at Annecy, I think, and then he was working on it on his personal time called Ash Raider, which has this really cool Y2K jet set radio kind of feel to it. He had the sticker planned out. He had these really fancy business cards that he had. As soon as he gave the sticker, I, slapped it on my phone. So overall, we had a really good day. And this is when Luis started opening up about his future plans, stuff related to animation and stuff outside of animation. Stuff that was really promising to us, and we were so thankful hearing that. And then towards later at night, this is when me and the rest of the group decided to go watch the 1 to F screening, whereas Luis joined us at the party. So the next day, things get really worrisome because that's when my roommate gets a call from the French police asking about Luis and what his mind state was, which was really weird. And then eventually his roommate or roommates start contacting me asking if I've seen him, and I said no. So I check out Luis's Instagram page. He hasn't updated it in 24 hours, which was really, really strange because he's always sharing pictures and stories on his Instagram about whatever he's up to. He's always updating that stuff. And then, I'm just going to fast forward to things, but the next day, later that night, we find out that he was killed. And that was when the tone of the trip changed for a lot of us. It was really hard to comprehend. We didn't want to believe it because it was just like all of his future goals or life goals that he told us, it just vanished in front of us. It was just, I felt incredibly sad for his family, his loved ones. I'm not going to get into details about, what happened regarding his death because there's a lot of things that we really don't know. There's a lot of things that are confusing to us. There's just a lot of things that is unknown to us. And I remember we were just really frustrated with how the outlets covered it or how certain articles talked about it, especially with some of the wording of how they portrayed Luis, which was, to me, really disrespectful. I'm not going to get into the details of, let's say, what happened to Luis, because that's not how I want to remember him. I think the moment we found out about his death, there were already people who organized a walk to mourn and celebrate Luis. One of the bars, Cafe des Arts, they made a small memorial for Luis for people to pay their respects. And, not everyone knew about the death, so it was only starting to catch up later during the trip. Towards the end of my trip in Annecy, I made a stop to the memorial to leave a drawing and to pay my respects. On my flight back to the United States, I was just looking through my Instagram messages. I looked for Luis, and I realized that him and we really didn't talk much, but he always responded to certain stories of mine and it wasn't related to animation. I would share stories of my mom's farm. I would share stories of food, and he would always compliment that stuff. And for some reason, I wasn't as responsive. Maybe it's just I was just too busy, or maybe I try to avoid screen time, or maybe I am just more comfortable or close to people that I've actually met in person. After meeting Luis in person, I always had plans to, let's say, reconnect with him, talk to him more and stuff like that. But that's an opportunity that I won't have anymore. And I'm just really sorry that this all happened. The friends I hung out with him and people that knew him that I'm close to, we just started talking about him more. We just started checking up on each other. We just said things like we're just very thankful to be a part of each other's lives. To me, it was a wake-up call to be a lot more responsive to certain people that do reach out. If I have certain rifts in my friendships or, family relationships or other relationships, I want to see if I can mend that. But something I notice about myself is that I don't necessarily respond to a lot of people that do reach out to me. And I do want to get better at that because in the past, I've had family members that I could have reached out to more. I could have engaged with more, but I no longer have that opportunity anymore because they've passed on. And that's why I'll say that my trip to Annecy was very surreal and solemn because, despite all of that, it could have been such a chill, amazing, and sort of fulfilling trip to me. But because of that incident, it was kind of weird where the remaining days were still kind of like happy and chill, but you could sense that there was a sense of sadness and everyone could feel it. The ones who knew about it, you could tell that they felt it and it affected their mood and their overall day. I know it made me feel a certain way, and there are times where I did feel guilty trying to enjoy my trip after that happened. And again, it's making me more sensitive to friends who do reach out, and for me to reach out to friends when I find myself thinking about them. I will wrap this video up saying that Annecy was definitely worth the visit for me, despite the tragedies that did happen over there. It was my first time being in France. It was my first time being in the film festival. I got to meet some amazing people, passionate, friendly people, or people that I've always wanted to meet for many years, but I just never got the chance to meet. The food is amazing. The touristy spots are really cool to check out. You may be there when another festival or another event is happening, so things are happening all the time in that little area. If you want to enjoy the festivals, meaning watch the screenings, the panels, the previews, etc., make sure you do your research, hear what's interesting, what interests you, and then just try to reserve those, because it's just going to save you a lot of trouble later down the line if you really want to catch the screenings. It was definitely one of my favorite trips. Now, to Louise, I will say that I'm very thankful to Louise. Louise, I know you're no longer with us, but thank you so much for spending the day with me, with Jeremy, with Leonard, with T, with Luke. It was one of the best days we've had during Annecy, and I'm so happy that you spent that day with us. You've shared your dreams, and we're super honored to hear that. And I'm sorry about what happened, and I'm sorry for your family and your loved ones. You brought your amazing skills to the animation field. You would have gone very far, hands down. But what you've already done is such a huge accomplishment. You've touched the hearts of many people in our field, and no one will ever forget that. Something I do want to say is that a lot of people who remember Louise don't just summarize him as a fantastic animator, but will share stories of how he'll introduce you to people, to places, and from what I've heard, he'll go out of his way to check up on you. An example that I do want to carry out for myself.